Elena Moretti wore white the day she became property. The cathedral was silent except for her thundering heartbeat and the slow click of Victor Caldero's polished shoes against marble, each step a countdown to a life sentence she never chose. When his cold hand closed around hers at the altar, she understood the truth her father had sold her into. This wasn't a wedding. It was a transfer of ownership. And the man now sliding a ring onto her trembling finger was the most dangerous criminal in 3 cities. A king without a crown, an executioner in a tailored suit, and now her husband. If you want to see how Elena survives her first night with the man who owns half the underworld, stay until the end. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button and comment with your city, so I can see how far Elena's story travels across the world. The morning of Elena Moretti's wedding began with her father's hand wrapped around her wrist, hard enough to bruise. "You will smile," Antonio Moretti hissed, his breath sour with whiskey and desperation. "You will say the words. You will not embarrass this family more than you already have by existing." Elena stared at the woman in the mirror, a stranger in ivory silk and forced elegance, dark hair twisted into an elaborate updo that pulled at her scalp, makeup applied by hands that weren't her own. The dress cost more than she'd earned in a year at the bookshop where she'd worked before her father dragged her back into the life she'd spent 5 years escaping. "Papa, please." Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "There has to be another way, another arrangement. I could disappear. You could tell them I ran." The slap snapped her head sideways. She tasted copper. "The arrangement is made," Antonio said, his face mottled with rage and fear in equal measure. "Victor Caldero does not negotiate. He demands, and we comply. You think I wanted this? You think I wanted to hand my daughter to that monster?" Elena pressed her palm to her stinging cheek, meeting her father's eyes in the mirror. She saw no love there. She never had. Only calculation, cowardice, and now the desperate relief of a man who'd found a way to pay his debts without dying for them. "Then what am I?" she whispered. "If not payment?" Antonio's jaw tightened. For a moment, something almost human flickered across his features. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold practicality that had governed every decision he'd ever made regarding her. "You're a Moretti," he said, "and Morettis survive. That's all we've ever done." He left without another word, the door clicking shut with the finality of a cell lock. Elena stood alone in the bridal suite of the Cathedral of St. Christopher, surrounded by flowers she hadn't chosen and wearing a future she'd never wanted. Through the tall windows, she could see the city spread below, the Chicago skyline cutting against a gray November sky, indifferent to the small tragedy unfolding in its shadow. She'd grown up in this city, left it at 18 with a scholarship and a vow never to return, built a quiet life in Portland, small apartment, steady job, no entanglements, no debts. Freedom, or at least the closest thing to it she'd ever known. Then 3 weeks ago, her father's men had found her. The message was simple. Come home, or we'll burn down everything you've built and everyone in it. She'd come home. Now she was here, about to marry a man she'd seen only once, 2 days ago, when he'd come to inspect his acquisition. Victor Caldero had walked into her father's study like he owned it. In truth, he probably did. He owned half of Chicago's South Side, controlled the ports, the unions, the flow of everything illegal and profitable. His organization moved like a shadow government, dispensing justice and retribution according to rules only he understood. He was 42 to her 28, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of severe handsomeness that made people instinctively step back. Dark hair silvering at the temples, a jaw that looked carved from granite, and eyes the color of winter storms, cold, assessing, revealing nothing. He'd looked at her the way someone might examine a painting before purchase. Thorough, clinical, utterly detached. "She'll do," he'd said to her father. Not a compliment, a confirmation of adequacy. Then he'd turned to her directly for the first time. "Do you understand what this is?" Elena had forced herself to meet those Arctic eyes. "A transaction." "Good." He'd buttoned his suit jacket with precise movements. "Then we understand each other. I don't expect affection, Elena. I expect obedience, discretion, and presence when required. In exchange, you'll want for nothing material. You'll be protected. You'll be untouchable. Unless you decide otherwise." His expression hadn't changed, but something shifted in the air between them. "I don't waste resources," he'd said quietly. You're an investment. I protect my investments. Then he'd left, leaving her father sagging with relief and Elena hollow with the understanding that she'd just been appraised like property and found acceptable. Now, 2 days later, she was about to become his wife. A knock at the door. Elena turned to find her cousin Maria slipping inside, her face tight with concern. "Everyone's seated," Maria whispered. "Elena, are you sure?" "I'm sure there's no choice." Elena straightened her shoulders, forced her spine to steel. "Is he here?" "Arrived 10 minutes ago. Half the Chicago underworld is in that cathedral. The other half is outside, making sure no one interrupts." Maria crossed the room, took Elena's cold hands in her warm ones. "Listen to me. Whatever happens in there, whatever he is, you're stronger than you think. You survived losing your mother. You survived him." She jerked her head toward the door their father had exited through. "You'll survive this too." Elena wanted to believe it, wanted to believe she was anything other than a pawn being moved across a board by men who saw her as leverage, obligation, solution. Instead, she squeezed Maria's hands once, let go, and picked up her bouquet of white roses and dark greenery. "Let's get this over with." The walk to the cathedral's main doors felt both endless and far too short. Elena could hear the organ playing inside, something classical and somber that matched the occasion's grim reality. Her father waited by the entrance, stiff in his ill-fitting tuxedo, looking anywhere but at her. When the doors opened, every head turned. Elena saw them in fragments as she walked down the aisle on her father's rigid arm. Men in expensive suits with hard eyes and concealed weapons. Women dripping in diamonds and careful neutrality. The entire hierarchy of Chicago's criminal underworld gathered to witness Victor Caldero claim his bride. And at the altar, Victor himself. He stood utterly still, hands clasped in front of him, watching her approach with that same clinical assessment he'd shown in her father's study. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her father's house, a white shirt, a black tie. No boutonniere, no concession to sentiment or tradition. He looked like exactly what he was, a man attending a business meeting that happened to be dressed up as a wedding. Elena's legs trembled with each step, but she kept moving. What choice did she have? Run? Where? The cathedral was surrounded by his men. The city was his territory. Her father's debt was real, and Victor Caldero's reputation for what he did to people who crossed him was even more so. She'd heard the stories, everyone had. Bodies found in the river, businesses that burned to the ground overnight, families that simply disappeared. He ruled through fear and absolute control, and no one challenged him twice. Now she was supposed to marry him. The aisle stretched on forever. Then suddenly she was there, standing beside him, and her father was stepping back with barely concealed relief. Up close, Victor was even more imposing. He had at least 8 inches on her 5'6" frame, and a presence that seemed to compress the air around them. He smelled like expensive cologne and something darker. Smoke, maybe. Gunpowder. When he looked down at her, his expression was unreadable. The priest began speaking. Elena heard the words as if from underwater. "Dearly beloved, gathered here today. Holy matrimony. Nothing about this was holy. Victor Caldero, do you take Elena Moretti to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." His voice was deep, steady, and completely emotionless. The priest turned to her, too. Elena felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes, felt Victor's presence beside her like a wall of controlled power, felt the future closing in like a trap. "Elena Moretti, do you take Victor Caldero to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Victor didn't move, didn't react, just waited with the patience of someone who knew the outcome was inevitable. Elena thought of running, thought of screaming, thought of every moment that had led her here. Her mother's death when she was 12, her father's descent into gambling and debt, her own desperate escape that had only ever been temporary. She thought of Maria's words. "You'll survive this too." "I do?" she whispered. The priest smiled like he'd witnessed something beautiful. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Victor turned to her fully. For just a second, something flickered in his eyes. But it was gone before Elena could identify it. He leaned down with economical precision, pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that lasted exactly 3 seconds and conveyed absolutely nothing. Then he straightened, took her hand, and tucked it into the crook of his arm. "It's done," he said quietly, just to her. They walked back down the aisle together as the organ swelled with recessional music. Elena felt numb, disconnected, like she was watching this happen to someone else. The reception was held in one of Victor's properties, a mansion in Lake Forest that looked like it belonged in a European capital rather than suburban Chicago. High ceilings, marble floors, artwork that was probably worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Elena moved through it like a ghost, saying nothing, eating nothing, while Victor conducted business disguised as celebration. Men approached him constantly, offering congratulations that were really status reports, asking questions that were really requests for permission or favors. He handled them all with the same cool efficiency, one hand always keeping Elena close, on her elbow, the small of her back, her shoulder. Never intimate, always controlling, claiming, hours blurred together. Speeches were made, champagne flowed, someone cut the cake. Elena smiled when expected and spoke when required, all while feeling like she was drowning in slow motion. Finally, mercifully, Victor leaned close and murmured, "We're leaving." He guided her through the crowds to a waiting car, a black Mercedes with windows so dark she couldn't see inside. A driver held the door. Victor handed her in like she was fragile, then slid in beside her. The door closed. The world went quiet. "Where are we going?" Elena asked. "Home," Victor said. The word landed like a stone. They drove through Chicago's nighttime streets in silence. Elena watched the city slide past. Her city, the place she'd been born, the place she'd fled, the place that had dragged her back and chained her to a man who treated her like property. The car eventually pulled up to a building she recognized, the Apex, one of Chicago's most exclusive residential towers, penthouse apartments that started at $5 million. Of course, Victor lived here. The driver opened the door. Victor exited first, then offered his hand. Elena took it because she had no choice. Let him guide her through a private entrance and into an elevator that required a keycard to access the top floor. They rode up in silence. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Her mind raced with every story she'd ever heard about wedding nights, about men like Victor, about what he might expect. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Lake Michigan and the city lights. Modern furniture, minimalist design, everything precisely arranged and clearly expensive. And completely soulless. Victor shrugged off his suit jacket, draped it over a chair, rolled up his sleeves with methodical precision. Elena stood frozen by the elevator, still holding her bouquet, unsure what was expected of her. "You're in the East Wing," Victor said without looking at her. He walked to a bar cart, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey. "Master bedroom, walk-in closet, full bathroom. Your things from your father's house have been moved in. If you need anything else, tell Rosa. She manages the household." Elena stared at him. "The East Wing?" "Yes." He took a drink, still not looking at her. "And you?" "West Wing." Understanding crashed over her. "We're not—" "No." Finally, he turned to face her, those cold eyes meeting hers. "I told you what this was, Elena. A transaction, an arrangement. I don't require intimacy. I require a wife in name and appearance. You fulfill that requirement by existing and being seen where necessary. Beyond that, your time is your own." She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt something more complicated, a strange mix of gratitude and insult. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Victor's expression didn't change. "Why what? Why marry me at all? If you don't want a real wife, why not just—" She gestured helplessly. "I don't understand what I'm for." For a long moment, he said nothing, just studied her with that unreadable gaze, taking another slow drink. "You're for protection," he said finally. "Mine and yours." "I don't understand." "You don't need to." He set down his glass with precise care. "You need to sleep. Tomorrow Rosa will show you the house, explain the schedule, answer your questions. You'll have a clothing allowance, a driver, security. You'll attend events when I require it. Beyond that, do what you want. Read, paint, shop, I don't care." He started to walk away, toward what she assumed was the West Wing. "Victor." He stopped, turned back. Elena forced herself to stand straighter, to meet his eyes, even though everything in her screamed to look away. If I'm going to be your wife, even in name only, I need to understand the rules. What's expected? What's forbidden? I won't survive this if I don't know the boundaries. Something shifted in his expression, too quick to catch, too subtle to name. Rule 1, he said quietly. You don't leave this building without security, ever. Rule 2, you don't speak to media, police, or anyone asking questions about me or my business. Rule 3, what happens in this house stays in this house. Rule 4, you maintain appearances in public. You're Mrs. Caldero, act like it. And Rule 5? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Don't ask questions you don't want answered. Then he turned and disappeared down a hallway, leaving Elena alone in the cavernous living room of her new prison. She stood there for a long time, still holding her bouquet, still wearing her wedding dress, trying to make sense of what her life had become. Finally, she set the flowers on a table and went to find the east wing. The bedroom was beautiful in the same cold, perfect way as the rest of the penthouse. King-size bed with white linens, modern furniture, abstract art on the walls, and through the windows, the endless dark expanse of Lake Michigan. Her clothes were indeed there, everything from her Portland apartment, her father's house, all neatly arranged in the walk-in closet. Someone had unpacked her entire life while she'd been getting married. Elena found pajamas changed mechanically, washed off the makeup that had been applied that morning by a woman who'd smiled and talked about how beautiful she looked. When she finally crawled into bed, she expected to lie awake all night, her mind racing. Instead, exhaustion dragged her under almost immediately. She dreamed of fire. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through windows she'd forgotten to cover. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then reality crashed back. Married to Victor Caldero. In a penthouse that felt more like a museum than a home. She showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater, defiant casual after yesterday's forced elegance, and ventured out of the east wing. The penthouse was silent. She found the kitchen, massive and modern and clearly designed by someone who never cooked. As she was trying to figure out how to work the espresso machine, a woman appeared. Mrs. Caldero, good morning. Elena turned to find a woman in her 50s, gray hair pulled back, kind eyes, wearing simple black slacks and a white blouse. I'm Rosa Delgado, the woman said. I manage Mr. Caldero's household. He asked me to help you settle in. Is he here? Elena asked. He left at 6 this morning. He typically works until evening, sometimes later. Rosa moved to the espresso machine with practiced ease. How do you take your coffee? Black, 2 sugars. Rosa nodded, preparing the drink with efficient precision. Mr. Caldero asked me to explain the household schedule and answer any questions you have. Elena accepted the coffee, grateful for something to hold. Where do I start? Over the next hour, Rosa explained the architecture of Elena's new life. The penthouse had 3 levels, connected by a private elevator and staircase. The main level held the living areas, kitchen, dining room, Victor's study, off-limits, and a library. The upper level contained the separate bedroom wings. The lower level housed a gym, home theater, wine cellar, and what Rosa carefully described as Mr. Caldero's private spaces, also off-limits. Staff came and went, cleaners 3 times a week, a chef available on request, Rosa herself 5 days a week. Security was constant but invisible. Cameras in all common areas, but not bedrooms or bathrooms, Rosa assured her. You have a driver available 24 hours, Rosa explained. Marcus, former military. Mr. Caldero trusts him completely. He'll take you anywhere you want to go, but security protocols require advance notice for trips outside the immediate area. Can I go to a bookstore? Elena asked. Rosa smiled. Of course. Just tell Marcus where you want to go. It wasn't freedom, but it was something. The days developed a rhythm. Elena woke alone, ate breakfast alone, spent her days reading in the library or exploring the city with Marcus shadowing her every move. She went to galleries, bookstores, coffee shops, anywhere that felt normal, anywhere she could pretend she was just a woman spending her day rather than a criminal's purchased wife. Victor was rarely there. She saw him at breakfast occasionally. He'd nod, ask if she needed anything, then disappear into his study or leave entirely. Some nights he didn't come home at all. On the evenings he was there, they ate dinner together in careful silence. He'd ask about her day in the tone of someone fulfilling an obligation. She'd give minimal answers, then they'd retreat to their separate wings. It should have been easier than she'd feared. He never touched her, never demanded anything, kept his distance like she was a piece of furniture he'd acquired and then forgotten about. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that she was waiting for something, that this careful, controlled arrangement was the calm before a storm she couldn't yet see. 3 weeks into the marriage, that feeling proved correct. She woke in the middle of the night to the sound of voices, low, urgent, angry, coming from somewhere in the penthouse. Elena slipped out of bed, pulled on a robe, and crept toward the noise. It led her to Victor's study. The door was cracked open, light spilling into the hallway. She knew she shouldn't listen. Rule 5, don't ask questions you don't want answered. She listened anyway. Getting bolder? Someone was saying, male voice, rough with stress. 3 of our warehouses hit in 2 weeks. They're not just stealing product, Victor. They're sending a message. What message? Victor's voice, calm and cold as always. That you're vulnerable. That the marriage made you soft. That you're distracted. A pause. Then, and what do you think, Marco? I think they're wrong. I think you're setting a trap. But I also think... The man, Marco, hesitated. I think bringing her into this complicated things. She is not part of this discussion. She's part of everything now. That's the point, isn't it? That's why you married her. Another pause. Longer. Get me names, Victor said finally. Everyone involved. Every connection. And double security on the penthouse. If they want to send a message, I'll send a response. In blood. And the girl? Is none of your concern. Footsteps approached the door. Elena fled back to her room, heart pounding, mind racing. They were talking about her, about the marriage, about protection. You're for protection, mine and yours. What did that mean? Protection from what? From whom? She lay awake the rest of the night, watching the ceiling, feeling the weight of questions she didn't have answers to, and a growing certainty that Victor Caldero's careful control was hiding something much larger and more dangerous than she'd understood. The next morning, she found him at breakfast. He looked tired, the first crack she'd seen in his perfect composure. We need to talk, Elena said. Victor glanced up from his coffee. About? About why you really married me. His expression didn't change, but his hand went still on the cup. I told you why. You said protection. You didn't say protection from what? She sat down across from him, forcing herself not to look away when those cold eyes focused on her. I heard you last night. Someone's targeting you. And it has something to do with me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he set down his coffee with precise care. You should have stayed in your room. Probably, but I didn't. So either you tell me what's happening, or I'll assume the worst and act accordingly. And what would acting accordingly look like? I don't know yet, but I'm tired of being a pawn who doesn't know the game. Victor studied her with that assessing gaze she was beginning to recognize, the look of someone calculating risk and benefit, weighing truth against deception. Finally he stood. Come with me. He led her to his study, a room she'd never entered. It was surprisingly sparse. A desk, filing cabinets, a wall of monitors showing security feeds from around the city. He went to one of the cabinets, unlocked it, and pulled out a folder. He handed it to her. Elena opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, police reports, photographs, all from 15 years ago. All about a fire that had destroyed a restaurant in Chicago's Little Italy. Her mother's restaurant. The fire that had killed her mother. Why do you have this? Elena's voice came out hoarse. Because I was there, Victor said quietly. The words didn't make sense. Elena looked up at him, saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Not quite guilt, not quite pain, but something close. What do you mean you were there? Victor moved to the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured, like each word cost him something. 15 years ago, I was building my organization, taking territory, making examples. Your mother's restaurant was in a neighborhood I was moving into. The previous owner, a man named Salvatore Costa, refused to pay protection, refused to acknowledge my authority. Elena's stomach dropped. So you burned it down? No. He turned to face her. So I met with him, negotiated. He agreed to terms, but someone else, a rival trying to undermine me, decided to send their own message. The fire. The fire. Victor's jaw tightened. It was supposed to be empty. Late night, after closing. Destroy the building, make Costa understand he'd chosen the wrong side. But your mother was there. She'd come back to get something she'd forgotten, and Costa had locked her in before he left. The room tilted. Elena gripped the desk to steady herself. She died because of a war I was fighting, Victor continued, his voice flat. She died because I was taking territory and someone else wanted to stop me. I didn't order it. I didn't know she was there. But it happened because of me. You've known, Elena whispered. This whole time, since I was 12. You've known who I was. Yes. And you married me anyway. You brought me into your world knowing... She couldn't finish. Couldn't breathe. Victor didn't move. I married you because the people who set that fire 15 years ago are moving again. They've been quiet for years, rebuilding, waiting. Now they're ready to challenge me, and when they researched my past looking for leverage, they found you. Found me? You're Antonio Moretti's daughter. Your mother was Giulia Moretti, who died in a fire connected to my organization. Your existence is a connection they can exploit, a vulnerability. If they got to you, if they took you, hurt you, used you, it would look like history repeating. It would make me look weak. Elena shook her head, trying to process. So you married me to protect your reputation. I married you to keep you alive. His voice was sharp now, cutting. Your father gambled himself into debt with people connected to my enemies. They were going to use that debt to get to you, Elena. Force him to hand you over, make an example. The only way to prevent that was to make you untouchable, and the only way to make you untouchable was to make you mine. The word hung in the air between them. I'm not yours, Elena said quietly. Legally, publicly, you are. And that status protects you. That's what this marriage is. That's what you're for. Elena looked down at the folder in her hands, at the photographs of her mother's restaurant engulfed in flames, at the life that had been destroyed because of power and territory and men like Victor Caldero. You could have told me, she said, before the wedding. You could have explained. Would you have believed me, or would you have run and gotten yourself killed in the process? She wanted to say she would have believed him, wanted to think she would have understood. But he was right. She would have run. She would have thought it was a lie, a manipulation, another way to control her. And if the enemies he was describing were real, she would have run straight into their hands. So what happens now? She asked. Now. Victor moved back to his desk, picked up his phone. Now you understand why you can't leave this building without security. Why you can't talk to strangers. Why every movement you make is monitored. Because the people who killed your mother are trying to get to me, and you're the most direct path. For how long? He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something almost human in those cold eyes. Until I end them. Permanently. Elena stood there, holding the folder, feeling the weight of 15 years of history and violence and death that had somehow led to this moment. To her, standing in a penthouse in Chicago, married to the man whose war had killed her mother, now being protected by him from the people who'd actually pulled the trigger. I don't know if I can forgive this, she said quietly. I'm not asking you to. Victor returned his attention to his phone, scrolling through messages. I'm asking you to survive. Everything else is secondary. Elena left the study, went back to her room, and stared at the folder for hours. Inside were pieces of her past she'd never known existed, evidence of a war she'd been pulled into as a child and was now, somehow, still fighting. And through it all, one truth kept circling back. Victor Caldero had known her longer than she'd known him, had watched her from a distance, had carried the weight of her mother's death for 15 years, had married her not out of desire or duty, but out of something more complicated, guilt and strategy tangled together. That night at dinner, she broke their careful silence. Tell me about my mother. Victor looked up, surprised. What? You said you met with Costa. That means you met my mother, or at least saw her. Tell me about her. For a long moment he didn't answer, then quietly. She was brave, stubborn, protective of what was hers. She stood up to Costa when he tried to cut corners, tried to water down the quality. She believed in doing things right, even when it was harder. She sounds like someone you'd respect. She was. And now she's dead, and I'm here, and you're trying to protect me from the same people who killed her. Elena set down her fork. Do you see the irony? Every day. The honesty surprised her. She'd expected deflection, coldness, not this quiet admission. Can I ask you something? Elena said. You can ask. I may not answer. If protecting me is about strategy, about not looking weak, why tell me the truth at all? Why not let me believe this was just a business arrangement? Victor was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost too quiet to hear. Because you deserve to know why your life is in danger, and because... He stopped. Started again. Because your mother died not knowing why. I won't let that happen to you. Elena felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, not trust, but a crack in the wall of anger and fear she'd built between them. Thank you, she said, for telling me. Victor nodded once, then returned to his meal. They finished dinner in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Less hostile. Less empty. That night, Elena dreamed of fire again. But this time, when she woke, she understood what it meant. She was living in the shadow of her mother's death, married to a man who'd been shaped by the same fire that had destroyed her family. And somewhere out there, the people who'd lit that match were coming for her. The question was whether Victor Caldero could keep his promise to keep her alive, or whether history would repeat itself and Elena would burn just like her mother had. The knowledge changed everything and nothing. Elena still woke alone in the East Wing, still spent her days navigating a life that felt borrowed. Still saw Victor primarily as a shadow moving through the penthouse, present but distant, protective but cold. But now when she looked at him across the breakfast table or caught glimpses of him working in his study late into the night, she saw something more than the monster she'd been sold to. She saw the man who'd carried her mother's death for 15 years. It didn't make her forgive him, but it made her see him. 2 weeks after their conversation in his study, Elena was in the library when Rosa appeared in the doorway, her usual calm replaced by something tighter. Mrs. Caldero, Mr. Caldero asked me to inform you that he'll be working from home today. He'd like to speak with you when you have a moment. The careful phrasing didn't disguise the command. Elena set down her book and followed Rosa to Victor's study. He was on the phone when she entered, his back to the door as he stared out the windows. His voice was low, controlled, but she caught the edge beneath it. I don't care what it costs. I want every connection mapped by tomorrow. Yes, all of them. He ended the call, turned, and seemed unsurprised to find her there. Close the door. Elena did, then remained standing, waiting. There's been a development, Victor said. He moved to his desk, pulled up something on his computer, then turned the screen toward her. This was delivered to one of my properties this morning. The image showed a photograph, old, faded, taken from a distance. It showed a young girl, maybe 12 years old, standing outside a school. Dark hair, oversized backpack, worn sneakers. Elena recognized herself immediately. Where did this come from? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Someone who wants me to know they've been watching you for years. Victor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The photo was taken 3 months after your mother died, outside your school in Evanston. The implication settled over her like ice water. Whoever killed her mother had been tracking her since she was a child. What do they want? Elena asked. To make me afraid. To show me they can reach what's mine. He closed the laptop with precise care. They're escalating. Testing boundaries. This is meant to provoke a response. And will it? Victor's eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw past the careful control to something darker underneath. They've had 15 years to come after you. They chose now because you're visible. Protected. Mine. They want to prove that my protection means nothing. Does it? We're about to find out. He pulled his phone from his pocket, checked something, then looked back at her. Starting today, security protocols are changing. You don't go anywhere without me or 2 armed guards minimum. No exceptions. Victor, this isn't negotiable, Elena. They sent that photo as a message. The next message might not be paper. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could take care of herself, that she wouldn't be a prisoner in a gilded cage. But the girl in that photograph, 12 years old, grieving, unaware she was being hunted, killed the words before they formed. How long? She asked instead. As long as it takes. And what are you going to do? Victor's expression went cold in a way that reminded her exactly who she'd married. What I should have done 15 years ago. End this permanently. He dismissed her then, returning to his phone and the business of orchestrating whatever violence was coming. Elena left the study feeling the walls of her new life closing in tighter. The next 3 days proved Victor hadn't been exaggerating. Security doubled. Marcus was joined by a second guard, a woman named Chen, who moved like a shadow, and never smiled. Rosa vetted every delivery, every visitor, every piece of mail that entered the penthouse. And Victor himself became a constant presence. He worked from home, took his meals with Elena, appeared in the library while she read, in the kitchen while she made coffee, always watching, always assessing. Not hovering, Victor Caldero didn't hover, but occupying space with the same controlled intensity he brought to everything else. It should have felt oppressive. Instead, Elena found herself studying him the way he studied her. She noticed things she'd missed before. The way he rolled his shoulders when he'd been sitting too long. How he took his coffee black but added a single sugar cube when he thought no one was watching. The scar that ran along his left forearm, usually hidden by his sleeves. The fact that he read actual books, philosophy and history, stacked on the table beside his preferred chair. Machiavelli? She asked one evening, nodding at the book in his hands. Victor glanced up. Disappointed it's not something more brutal? Surprised it's not something more current. The fundamentals of power don't change, just the methods. He marked his page, set the book aside. You read a lot. Mose. It wasn't quite a question, but Elena answered anyway. It's what I did in Portland. Worked in a bookshop, read everything I could get my hands on, built a life that was quiet and mine. You miss it. Every day. She met his eyes. But I understand why I can't go back. Something shifted in his expression. Acknowledgement, maybe. Respect. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you had to leave it. Are you? Or are you just sorry that protecting me required disrupting my life? Victor considered the question with his usual careful deliberation. Both, he said finally, but mostly the first. The honesty surprised her. She'd expected deflection, the kind of calculated response he gave everyone else. Instead, he was giving her something closer to truth. Can I ask you something? Elena said. You've been asking questions since you got here. Why stop now? The scar on your arm. How did you get it? Victor's hand moved unconsciously to his forearm, then stopped. Why do you want to know? Because you know everything about me. You've known me since I was 12, and I know almost nothing about you except that you're dangerous and you're trying to keep me alive. It feels unbalanced. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he rolled up his sleeve, revealing the scar fully, a long, jagged line running from wrist to elbow. Knife fight. 20 years ago, I was 22, trying to prove myself to men who thought I was too young, too educated, too weak to lead. His voice was matter of fact, like he was recounting someone else's story. 3 of them cornered me in an alley, wanted to send me back to whatever university I'd crawled out of. I put 2 in the hospital. The 3rd gave me this before I broke his arm. And after? After they understood I wasn't weak. Fear's a better foundation than respect. It lasts longer. Elena studied the scar, the evidence of violence that had helped build the man sitting across from her. Do you believe that? That fear lasts longer than respect? I've built an empire on it. What do you think? I think, Elena said slowly, that fear makes people obey, but respect makes them loyal. And loyalty is what protects you when fear isn't enough. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing. You sound like your mother. The words landed like a punch. You said you barely knew her. I said I met her. I didn't say I forgot her. He rolled his sleeve back down with precise movements. She told Costa the same thing when he tried to intimidate her into cutting corners. That fear would make his employees comply, but respect would make them care about the quality of their work. He didn't listen. And you did? No, but I remembered. Victor stood, crossed to the window. I built everything on fear and control because that's what worked, what kept me alive. But lately I've been wondering if your mother was right, if there's a cost to ruling through intimidation alone. What changed? Elena asked. He didn't turn around. You did. The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications Elena wasn't ready to examine. She stood, suddenly needing distance, and retreated to her room before Victor could say anything else. But his words followed her, stayed with her as she tried to read, tried to sleep, tried to pretend that something fundamental wasn't shifting between them. The breaking point came 4 days later. Elena was in the kitchen with Rosa, learning to make proper Italian espresso, a small rebellion against the gilded imprisonment of her new life, when the building's fire alarm shrieked to life. Rosa's hand went immediately to the phone on her belt. Stay here, she ordered, already moving toward the elevator. But before Elena could respond, the power cut out. The penthouse plunged into darkness. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in harsh red shadows. And through it all, the alarm kept screaming. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Something was wrong. This wasn't a drill. She moved toward the hallway, toward Victor's study, and nearly collided with Chen emerging from the shadows. Mrs. Caldero, we need to move. Now. What's happening? Building security's been compromised. We're following lockdown protocol. Chen's hand closed around Elena's arm, firm but not painful. Mr. Caldero is securing the elevator. We're taking the stairs. The stairs? We're on the 40th floor. Would you prefer to wait for whoever cut the power? Chen was already pulling her toward a door Elena had never noticed before, concealed in the wall paneling. It opened onto a concrete stairwell, emergency lights casting everything in sickly yellow. They'd made it down 3 flights when they heard footsteps below them. Multiple sets, moving fast. Chen went still, listening. Then she pushed Elena against the wall, her body a shield, and drew a gun from somewhere Elena couldn't see. How many? Elena whispered. Quiet. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Then voices, low and urgent. Penthouse level. Caldero's moving her to the garage. He'll have men with him. We take them out, grab the girl. We're gone before anyone. Chen moved before they finished the sentence. She stepped into the stairwell, fired twice, and 2 bodies dropped before Elena's brain processed what was happening. Move! Chen hauled Elena forward, over the bodies, down the stairs. Don't look. Just run. Elena ran. Her legs burned. Her lungs screamed. The emergency lighting made everything feel surreal, nightmarish. Behind them, she could hear more footsteps. Shouts. Gunfire echoing in the concrete space. They burst through a door on the 20th floor and into a hallway. Chen pulled Elena into a maintenance closet, shut the door, and made a phone call with clipped precision. Chen, under attack, 20th floor, east stairwell. Have the package. Need extraction. She listened, nodded, ended the call. Victor's coming, she said to Elena. We hold here until he arrives. Who were those men? People who made a mistake thinking they could get to you. Elena's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs, trying to steady herself, trying not to think about the bodies in the stairwell, the blood, the casual efficiency with which Chen had killed 2 people. This was Victor's world. Violence and strategy and lives ended with 2 bullets. And now it was her world too. 5 minutes that felt like hours passed before the door opened and Victor appeared, flanked by 2 men Elena didn't recognize. He took in the scene, Chen standing guard, Elena pressed against the wall, and something dangerous flashed across his face. Are you hurt? His voice was steady, but his eyes moved over her like he was cataloging every detail. No, Chen got me out before... Good, he turned to Chen. Status? 4 confirmed hostiles, 2 down. 2 retreated when reinforcements arrived. Buildings locked down. Security's doing a full sweep. Victor's jaw tightened. They got inside, past my security, into my building. Someone gave them access codes, one of the men said. Had to be internal. Then find them. Victor's voice went cold enough to frost the air. I want names. I want everyone who touched those codes. And I want them in front of me by morning. The men nodded and disappeared back into the hallway. Victor finally looked at Elena again. Really looked at her. Can you walk? Yes. Then come with me. We're leaving. He led them through a service corridor Elena had never seen, down a different stairwell to an underground garage where 3 identical black SUVs waited, engines running. Victor guided Elena into the middle vehicle, sliding in beside her while Chen took the front passenger seat. The convoy moved as one, out of the garage and into the Chicago night. Elena watched the city slide past through tinted windows, her mind still trying to process what had just happened. Someone had tried to take her, had infiltrated Victor's building, cut the power, and come for her specifically. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere safer. Victor was on his phone, issuing orders in a voice that promised retribution. When he finished, he turned to her. Are you sure you're not hurt? I'm fine. Terrified, but fine. Good. Because we're about to have a very honest conversation about what happens next. The SUV pulled up to a building Elena didn't recognize. Older, industrial, the kind of place that looked abandoned, but probably wasn't. Victor led her inside, through hallways that smelled like concrete and old oil, to an elevator that descended instead of rising. They emerged into what looked like a war room. Maps covered the walls. Computer screens showed feeds from across the city. And at a large table in the center sat three men who stood when Victor entered. "Gentlemen," Victor said, "this is my wife, Elena. Elena, these are my most trusted advisors. Marco, who you've heard me speak with, James, who handles security, and David, who manages intelligence." The men nodded. Elena felt their eyes on her, assessing, calculating, trying to determine if she was liability or asset. "Sit," Victor said, pulling out a chair for her. When she did, he remained standing, his hands braced on the table. "Tell me everything." Marco pulled up footage on one of the screens. 4 men entered through the parking garage at 1400 hours. They had valid access codes, valid credentials. Security didn't flag them because according to the system, they were authorized maintenance. Except they weren't, James added. Real maintenance was scheduled for next week. These codes were duplicated from an internal source. Ish, how internal? Victor's voice was deadly quiet. "Your head of building security, Frank Morrison." David brought up a photo. A man in his 50s, unremarkable. "He's been on your payroll for 8 years, vetted, trusted, and as of this morning, missing." Victor's hands curled into fists on the table. "Find him, and find out who bought him." "Already tracking him." "But Victor, there's more." Marco pulled up another image. A blurry photo taken from a distance, showing a man Elena didn't recognize. "This was taken outside Morrison's apartment 2 weeks ago. We ran facial recognition. He's connected to the Giordano family." The name meant nothing to Elena, but Victor went very still. "You're certain?" he asked. 93% match, and it fits the pattern. The warehouse hits, the photograph, now this. The Giordanos are moving against you. Elena watched Victor process this information, saw the way his expression shifted from cold anger to something more calculated, more dangerous. "The Giordanos," she said quietly, "they're the ones who killed my mother." Victor's eyes cut to her. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he nodded once. "Salvatore Giordano ordered the fire 15 years ago. He was building territory, same as me. Your mother's restaurant was caught in the middle." Victor's voice was flat, emotionless, but Elena heard the control it took to keep it that way. "I destroyed his organization, took everything he'd built, forced him into exile. I thought that would be the end of it." "But he's back," Elena finished. "His son is." "Salvatore died 3 years ago, but Marco, his son, has been rebuilding, quietly, carefully. And now he's ready to take back what his father lost. By taking me. By hurting me however he can. You're the most visible target, the newest acquisition, the proof that I have something worth protecting." Victor straightened, his decision made. "Which is why you're staying here until this is finished." Elena looked around the bunker, understanding what he meant. "For how long?" "As long as it takes to end the Giordano family permanently." "Victor, this isn't a discussion, Elena. They came into my home. They tried to take you. They corrupted my people and attempted to kill you in the building where you should have been safest." His voice was quiet, but the fury underneath it was unmistakable. "I will burn their organization to the ground. I will erase every connection they have. And I will make sure Marco Giordano understands exactly what happens when someone threatens what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her, should have reminded her that she was property, an acquisition, a thing to be protected because it reflected on his power. Instead, she heard something else underneath it, something raw. "You blame yourself," she said quietly, "for my mother, for not stopping them then, for not protecting her the way you're trying to protect me now." Victor's expression didn't change, but she saw his jaw tighten. "What I blame myself for is irrelevant. What matters is that history doesn't repeat. Even if that means more violence, more death? Especially then." He turned away from her, from the concern in her voice, and addressed his men. "I want a full workup on every Giordano connection, every business, every property, every person on their payroll. We move in 48 hours. The men nodded, already pulling up information, making calls. Victor moved to a corner of the room, his back to everyone, his phone pressed to his ear as he orchestrated whatever war was coming. Elena sat alone at the table, feeling the weight of 15 years of history pressing down on her. Her mother had died because of a war between powerful men. Now Elena was caught in the same war, the next generation fighting battles started by their fathers. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Victor Caldero, trying to protect her from a threat he'd created when she was just a child. Hours passed. The men worked with intense focus, mapping connections, tracking movements. Victor barely moved from his corner, orchestrating pieces of a plan Elena couldn't see but could feel building like a storm. Finally, Chen appeared in the doorway. "Sleeping quarters are ready, Mrs. Caldero. I'll show you to your room." Elena glanced at Victor, but he didn't turn around. She followed Chen down another hallway to a small, functional bedroom, nothing like the luxury of the penthouse, but clean and secure. "There's a bathroom through there," Chen said. "Food in the kitchen down the hall. You need anything? I'm 2 doors down." "Thank you, for earlier, for getting me out." Chen's expression didn't change. "It's my job." "Still, thank you." When Chen left, Elena sat on the bed and finally let herself shake. Let the terror of the attack, the gunfire, the bodies in the stairwell crash over her all at once. She'd almost died today. Almost been taken by people who wanted to hurt Victor by destroying her. And Victor, cold, controlled Victor, had looked at her with something close to fear when he'd found her in that maintenance closet. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Victor standing there, hands in his pockets, looking less composed than she'd ever seen him. "Can I come in?" he asked. Elena stepped back, let him enter. He moved to the window, a tiny square of reinforced glass showing nothing but darkness, and stood there for a long moment before speaking. "I need you to understand something," he said finally. "What happened today? That's on me. My security failed. My people were compromised. You were put in danger because I didn't anticipate how far Marco Giordano would go. You can't predict everything. I should have predicted this." He turned to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Victor Caldero looked almost vulnerable. "Your mother died because I was careless about civilian casualties. I won't let the same thing happen to you." "So you'll start a war instead?" "I'll end one. There's a difference." Elena moved closer, studying his face in the dim light. "Is there? Or is this just more violence begetting violence, the same cycle that killed my mother in the first place?" "What would you have me do?" Victor's voice was tight. "Let them try again? Wait until they succeed? Your mother had no protection. You do. That's the difference. The difference is you're using me to justify a war you've wanted to fight for 15 years. The words hung between them, sharp and accusatory. Victor's expression went cold. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? You said Salvatore Giordano is dead, his organization destroyed, but his son rebuilt. And you let him because some part of you wanted this confrontation, wanted the excuse to finish what you started." Elena crossed her arms. "I'm not your redemption, Victor, and I'm not your excuse for violence." "No," Victor said quietly. "You're the person I'm trying to keep alive, whether you believe that or not." He left before she could respond, the door clicking shut with terrible finality. Elena stood alone in the small room, feeling the weight of truth and accusation tangled together. She didn't know if she was right about Victor's motivations. Didn't know if he was protecting her out of guilt or strategy or something more complicated. But she knew one thing with certainty. Blood was coming, and she was the reason why. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Elena lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the bunker, footsteps in the hallway, low voices, the distant hum of machinery. She thought about her mother, about Victor, about the photograph of herself at 12 being watched by people who wanted her dead. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, she heard her door open. She sat up fast, heart racing, and found Victor standing in the doorway. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to wake you. I was just checking." He stopped, started again. "I needed to make sure you were safe." Elena pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I'm fine. Chen's 2 doors down. Your security is everywhere. I'm probably safer here than I've been since you married me." "Probably isn't certain." "Nothing's certain, Victor. That's life." He leaned against the doorframe, and in the low light she could see the exhaustion in his face. "I can't sleep," he admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see you in that stairwell. Or worse, I see what would have happened if Chen hadn't gotten to you first." The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. This wasn't the cold crime lord or the calculating strategist. This was just a man, afraid. "But she did," Elena said gently. I'm here. I'm alive. You need to sleep, Victor. You can't orchestrate a war if you're falling apart. Is that what you think I'm doing? Falling apart? I think you're carrying guilt that isn't entirely yours to carry. And I think that guilt is making you see threats everywhere, even in your own exhaustion. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed off the door frame. Get some sleep, Elena. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Wait. She didn't know why she said it. Didn't know what she wanted except that she didn't want him to leave carrying that weight alone. Stay, just for a while, until you can sleep. He looked at her like she'd suggested something impossible. Elena, I'm not asking for anything except company. Sit, rest, let yourself stop being Victor Caldero, crime lord, for 5 minutes and just be human. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then he moved to the chair in the corner, sat down heavily, and let his head fall back against the wall. They stayed like that. Elena in bed, Victor in the chair, in a silence that was companionable rather than hostile. And somewhere in that quiet, Elena fell asleep to the sound of Victor's breathing, steady and alive. When she woke hours later, he was gone. But on the table beside her bed was a note in precise handwriting. Thank you, stay safe. V. Elena held the note, feeling something shift in her understanding of the man she'd married. He wasn't just a monster, wasn't just a strategist using her as a pawn. He was a man trying to protect her from a past they both inherited, trying to rewrite a history that had already been written in her mother's blood. And despite everything, despite the fear and the anger and the impossibility of their situation, Elena was starting to believe he might actually succeed. The question was what would happen when the war was over, and they had to figure out what they were to each other without violence holding them together. The bunker became Elena's world for 6 days. She woke each morning to the sound of Victor's voice filtering through the walls, orders given with quiet precision, plans adjusted, pieces moved across a board she couldn't see. She ate meals in the small kitchen with Chen, who spoke little but taught Elena basic self-defense moves that felt inadequate against the kind of threats Victor's world contained. She read books Marco brought from somewhere, stories about other people's lives that felt impossibly distant from her own. And each night, Victor appeared at her door. He never stayed long. Would check on her with that same careful assessment, ask if she needed anything, then disappear back into the war room. But on the third night, when Elena woke gasping from a nightmare about fire and men with guns, she found him already there, sitting in the chair like he'd been keeping watch. You were screaming, he said quietly. Elena pressed her hands to her face, trying to slow her breathing. I'm fine, just a dream. About today? The attack? About everything. She lowered her hands, met his eyes in the darkness. About my mother. About being 12 and watching her restaurant burn. About those men in the stairwell. It all blurs together. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, moved to the small table by the window, and poured water from a pitcher there. He brought it to her, waited while she drank. The dreams don't stop, he said. You learn to function around them, but they don't stop. You have them too? Everyone in this life does. Violence leaves marks. The visible ones heal faster than the invisible ones. Elena set down the glass, studying his face in the low light. What do you dream about? She expected him to deflect, to retreat behind that wall of careful control. Instead, he sat on the edge of her bed, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his features. Fire, he said. Your mother's restaurant burning. The calls I got that night, arriving too late. He paused. I dream about finding her, about what she looked like when they pulled her body from the rubble, and I dream about the moment I realized a 12-year-old girl was somewhere in the city, alone, because I'd been careless about civilian casualties in a war that had nothing to do with her. The honesty stole Elena's breath. Victor, I tracked you after, he continued, his voice steady despite the weight of the confession. Made sure you were safe, that your father kept you fed, clothed, in school. When you left for Portland, I made sure no one from my world followed. I've been watching over you for 15 years, Elena, long before I married you. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. Because I owed your mother that much. Because I knew someday the people who'd actually set the fire would come back. And when they did, you'd be the easiest way to hurt me. He met her eyes. And because guilt is a patient companion, it waits as long as it takes. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. So this marriage, protecting me, it's all about guilt? About trying to fix something that can't be fixed? It started that way. Victor's hand moved, almost touched her face, then stopped. But somewhere in the last 2 months, it became something more complicated. What do you mean? He stood abruptly, moving back to safer distance. Get some sleep. We'll talk more tomorrow. Victor, wait. But he was already gone, leaving Elena alone with the echo of his words and the growing certainty that the space between them was shifting into something neither of them knew how to navigate. The next morning, she found him in the war room, staring at a wall of photographs and documents mapping the Giordano organization. He looked like he hadn't slept. How bad is it? Elena asked. Victor glanced at her, then back at the wall. They're more entrenched than I thought. Marco Giordano spent 3 years building legitimate fronts. Construction companies, restaurants, import businesses. Everything clean on the surface. Everything designed to hide what's underneath. Which is weapons trafficking, money laundering, human cargo. His voice went flat. He's worse than his father. Salvatore had principles, twisted as they were. Marco has profit margins. Elena moved closer, studying the photographs. Young women in shipping manifests. Financial records showing millions moving through shell corporations. Maps of routes that stretched from Chicago to the coasts. How do you stop someone like that, she asked. You take away their foundation, their money, their protection, their connections. You make them vulnerable, then you strike. Victor turned to her. I'm moving against them tomorrow night. Simultaneous hits on their primary revenue streams. By dawn, Marco Giordano will have lost everything that matters. And then? Then I find him. And make sure he understands there's a cost for threatening my family. The word family hung in the air between them. Elena had never heard Victor use it before, had assumed she was property, investment, obligation, not family. I want to help, she heard herself say. Victor's expression hardened. Absolutely not. I didn't mean in the attack. I meant with this. She gestured at the wall. You said his organization traffics people, women. That means records, victims, people trapped in his network. I can help identify them, help find ways to get them out. Elena, I'm not asking to hold a gun or storm a warehouse. I'm asking to do something useful instead of hiding in a bunker while you dismantle an empire. She stepped closer, holding his gaze. My mother died because of this war. If I can help end it, if I can help the people caught in it the way she was, then let me. Victor studied her for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind his eyes. Finally, he nodded once. David, he called. One of his advisors appeared. Show Mrs. Caldero the trafficking records. She's going to help us identify victims and safe extraction points. David's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. This way. Elena spent the next 12 hours buried in documents that made her stomach turn. Women's names, ages, countries of origin, routes they'd been moved along, places they'd been sold. The clinical precision of it, the way human beings were reduced to inventory and profit margins, left her shaking with rage. But beneath the horror, she found patterns, repeat locations, time gaps that suggested holding facilities, names that appeared across multiple transactions, suggesting handlers or buyers. She compiled it all, cross-referenced it with maps David provided, and by evening had identified 7 probable locations where victims might be held. When she brought her findings to Victor, he was in the middle of a briefing with his team. He looked up as she entered, tired but focused. I found them, Elena said, spreading her maps on the table. Or at least where I think they're keeping them. These 3 locations have the highest probability based on transaction patterns and timing. Marco leaned forward, studying her work. You got this from the financial records? And the shipping manifests. The gaps between transactions suggest holding periods. And these addresses show up repeatedly in different contexts, which means they're probably front locations. She pointed to the map. Here, here, and here. Victor's team exchanged glances. James pulled up surveillance footage of one of the addresses Elena had flagged. She's right, he said. We've had eyes on this location for 2 days, heavy security, restricted access. But we didn't know what it was for. Now we do. Victor looked at Elena, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Good work. Over the next hours, Victor's plan expanded to include extraction teams for the locations Elena had identified. She watched him orchestrate it with surgical precision. Teams assigned, timelines coordinated, backup plans layered on backup plans. This was Victor Caldero at his most dangerous, she realized. Not violent, but strategic. A chess master moving pieces toward inevitable checkmate. What happens to them? Elena asked quietly. The women we get out? Safe houses first, Victor said. Medical care, legal documentation if they want it. Then we help them get home or start over here. Whatever they choose. He paused. I have resources set aside for exactly this. Money Salvatore Giordano's organization made from their suffering. Seems appropriate to use it to rebuild their lives. Elena felt something shift in her understanding of the man beside her. You've done this before. Helped trafficking victims. When I can. Usually the operations I dismantle are smaller. This is the largest we've attempted. His jaw tightened. Which is why it has to work. It will, Elena said with more confidence than she felt. Victor's hand covered hers on the table. Brief, warm, gone, before she could fully register the contact. But the gesture said what words couldn't. Thank you. I see you. You matter. The team dispersed to prepare, leaving Elena and Victor alone in the war room. You should get some rest, Victor said. Tomorrow's going to be long. So should you. When's the last time you slept more than 2 hours? I'll sleep when this is finished. Victor, I can't, Elena. He turned to face her fully, and she saw the strain beneath his control. Every time I close my eyes, I see a dozen ways this could go wrong. Ways you could get hurt. Ways the people we're trying to save could die because I miscalculated. I can't sleep through that. Elena moved closer, close enough to feel the tension radiating from him. Then talk to me. Tell me what you're afraid of. For a long moment she thought he'd deflect. Then the words came, quiet and raw. I'm afraid I'll lose you the way I lost your mother. That all this planning, all this protection won't be enough. That Marco Giordano will find a way past my defenses and take you, and I'll arrive too late again. His hands curled into fists at his sides. I'm afraid that even if we win tomorrow, even if we destroy his organization and save every person trapped in it, it won't matter because the cost will be you. I'm right here, Elena said softly. Safe. Protected. Because of you. For now, but tomorrow you're going to do what you do best. You're going to outthink them, outmaneuver them, and take apart everything they built. She reached up, placed her palm against his chest, felt his heart hammering beneath the careful control. And I'm going to trust that the man who's been protecting me since I was 12 won't stop now. Victor's hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his chest. You shouldn't trust me this much. Probably not, but I do anyway. They stood like that, closer than they'd ever been, the space between them charged with everything they hadn't said. Elena could feel the moment stretching, pulling towards something inevitable. Then Victor stepped back, breaking the contact. Get some rest, he said, his voice rougher than usual. I'll wake you before we move. He left before she could respond, and Elena stood alone in the war room, her hand still warm from where it had touched him, her heart racing with the understanding that whatever was building between them was becoming impossible to ignore. She woke 6 hours later to Chen knocking on her door. Mrs. Caldero, Mr. Caldero asked me to bring you to the operations center. Teams are moving in 20 minutes. Elena dressed quickly and followed Chen to a room she hadn't seen before, filled with monitors showing live feeds from across the city. Victor stood at the center, surrounded by his team, coordinating final details. He looked up when she entered, and for just a second something soft crossed his features. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold focus of a man about to go to war. Status, he said to the room at large. Teams in position, Marco reported. Alpha and Beta teams at the warehouses. Gamma team at the shipping facility. Delta and Echo teams at the locations Mrs. Caldero identified. Authorities? Standing by on our signal. They'll move in for arrests once we've secured the civilians. Victor nodded. Understood. All teams, this is a synchronized operation. We move together. No one jumps early. No one leaves civilians behind. This is about precision, not body count. He paused. Execute in 5 minutes. The room went quiet, the tension building like a held breath. Elena found herself standing beside Victor, close enough to hear him counting down the seconds under his breath. 3 minutes, Marco called. Victor's hand found Elena's, squeezed once, then let go. The gesture was so quick she almost thought she'd imagined it. 1 minute. On the monitors, Elena could see Victor's teams positioned outside nondescript buildings across Chicago. Men in tactical gear, weapons ready, waiting for the signal. 30 seconds. Victor's jaw was tight, his entire body coiled with controlled tension. Execute. The teams moved as one. Doors breached, rooms cleared, shouts and gunfire echoing through the audio feeds. Elena watched it unfold across a dozen screens, her heart in her throat. Alpha Team, warehouse secured, 12 hostiles detained. Beta Team, warehouse secured, 8 hostiles detained, 16 civilians safe. Gamma Team, facility secured, heavy resistance, casualties on hostile side. The reports came in rapid succession, each team confirming secured locations and rescued civilians. The coordination was flawless, the execution precise. Whatever else Victor Caldera was, he was a master strategist. Then Delta Team's feed went dark. Delta Team, report, Victor said, his voice sharp. Static. Delta Team, confirm status. More static. Then a voice, strained. Heavy resistance. They were waiting for us. I've got 2 men down. Gunfire erupted through the audio. Victor's hand slammed on the table. Delta Team, fall back and regroup. Echo Team, divert to Delta's location. Now. Elena watched the monitor showing Echo Team change direction, racing toward where Delta had gone dark. Her hands were shaking. Which location is that? She asked. The shipping warehouse. The one you flagged as highest probability. Victor was already moving, grabbing his jacket, checking a weapon Elena hadn't realized he was carrying. They knew we were coming. Someone tipped them off. Victor, you can't... I have men down and civilians trapped. I'm not staying here. He turned to Marco. You have command. Coordinate with the authorities, process the detained hostiles, secure the rescued civilians. I'm going to Delta's location. Victor, that's exactly what they want. You walking into a trap. Then I'll spring it on my terms. He was at the door, Chen already moving to follow him. Wait. Elena's voice stopped him. If this is a trap, if they're expecting you, take me with you. Every person in the room turned to stare at her. Absolutely not, Victor said. Think about it. They're expecting you to come in guns blazing. They're expecting the crime lord coming to save his men. They're not expecting you to show up with your wife. Elena moved toward him, her mind racing. If I'm there, it changes the dynamic. It gives you leverage. Makes you look like you're negotiating rather than attacking. Elena, this isn't a game. These are people who want you dead. Which is exactly why they won't expect you to bring me. She held his gaze. You said I was an investment you protect. So protect me by using me strategically. Let me help. Victor looked at her like she'd lost her mind. No, it's too dangerous. Everything about this life is dangerous. At least this way I'm doing something instead of waiting to be saved. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You've been protecting me from the shadows for 15 years, Victor. Trust me to stand beside you now. Trust that I'm stronger than you think. For a long moment, he said nothing. She could see the war in his eyes, the instinct to protect her versus the strategic calculation of her argument. Finally, he turned to Chen. Body armor. Comms. And you don't leave her side for a second. Chen nodded, already moving. Victor looked back at Elena, and his expression was harder than she'd ever seen it. You stay behind me. You do exactly what I say. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Understood. Good. Because if anything happens to you, it won't be Marco Giordano I'm destroying. It'll be myself. The drive to the shipping warehouse took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Victor spent it on the phone, coordinating with Echo Team, getting updates from the authorities standing by. Elena sat beside him, feeling the weight of her decision settling over her. This was insane. She was about to walk into a firefight with people who'd tried to kill her less than a week ago. But something in her refused to back down, refused to be the helpless victim waiting to be saved. If this was her life now, if she was truly part of Victor's world, then she would face it on her feet. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and sprawling. Echo Team's vehicles were already there, taking defensive positions. Victor's SUV pulled up, and he was out before it fully stopped. Status, he demanded. The Echo Team leader stepped forward. Delta Team's pinned she down in Pimpa. 3 hostiles confirmed, maybe more. They've got civilians as shields. Won't negotiate. Where's Marco Giordano? No sign of him, but someone inside keeps asking for you specifically. Says they'll only talk to Victor Caldera. Victor's expression went ice cold. Then let's not keep them waiting. He started toward the warehouse entrance. Elena moved to follow, Chen a shadow at her side. One of Victor's men handed her a vest, heavy, reinforced, marked with white letters that said, "Civilian." "Stay behind him," the man murmured. "Don't be a hero." Elena nodded, her mouth too dry for words. They entered the warehouse through a side entrance, moving through darkness lit only by emergency lights. Victor led with practiced precision, weapon drawn, every movement controlled. They could hear voices ahead, angry, desperate. Then they rounded a corner and Elena saw it. Delta Team's men were behind overturned crates, pinned down by gunfire from elevated positions. And in the center of the warehouse, lit by a single overhead light, stood a man Elena didn't recognize holding a gun to a young woman's head. "Victor Caldero," the man called out. "So good of you to join us. I was beginning to think you didn't care about your men." "Let the civilians go," Victor said, his voice carrying across the warehouse. "Whatever point you're trying to make, they're not part of it." "Oh, but they are. They're proof of what happens when people cross the Giordano family." The man smiled, cruel and cold. "Marco sends his regards, by the way. Says to tell you this is just the beginning." "Where is he?" "Somewhere you'll never find him. Somewhere safe while his people finish what his father started." The man's eyes found Elena, and his smile widened. "And you brought her. How thoughtful. Saves us the trouble of hunting her down later." Victor's hand moved, pushing Elena further behind him. "You want me? Here I am. Let them go." "I don't think so." See, Marco was very specific about his instructions. Make you watch. Make you understand what it feels like to lose everything you've tried to protect. The gun moved from the young woman's head toward Elena. Everything happened at once. Victor lunged forward, his weapon coming up. Chen grabbed Elena, pulling her down behind cover. Gunfire erupted from 3 different directions. And in the chaos, Elena saw the young woman the gunman had been holding break free, running toward Delta Team's position. More gunfire. Shouts. The sound of bodies hitting concrete. Then silence. Elena raised her head to find Victor standing over the gunman's body, his weapon still raised, his expression murderous. The other hostiles were down, secured by Echo and Delta Teams. And the civilians, at least a dozen of them, all young women, were being guided to safety. "Clear," someone shouted. Victor lowered his weapon, turned, and his eyes found Elena with an intensity that made her breath catch. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, pulled her up, and before she could speak, his hands were cupping her face. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, desperate. "No, I'm fine. Chen kept you safe. Good." His forehead dropped to hers, just for a second, a moment of relief so raw it made Elena's chest ache. Then he stepped back, control slamming back into place. But not before she'd seen beneath it. Not before she'd understood what her presence here had cost him. "Get these people to the safe houses," Victor ordered. "Process the hostiles, and someone find me Marco Giordano's location. He can't have gone far." His team moved to comply. Elena stood among the chaos, watching Victor coordinate the aftermath with the same precision he'd shown planning the attack. But his eyes kept finding her, checking, making sure she was still there, still safe. It took 2 hours to secure the scene and transfer the rescued civilians. Elena helped where she could, offering water and calm words to women who looked shell-shocked and terrified. Their gratitude was overwhelming, their relief palpable. This was why Victor had moved tonight. Not just to hurt Marco Giordano, but to save these people from being treated as inventory. When the last civilian was loaded into a transport van, Victor approached Elena where she stood with Chen. "We're leaving," he said. "Back to the bunker." "What about Marco Giordano?" "What about him?" "You said you'd find him, make him understand." "And I will, but not tonight. Not with you anywhere near the operation." Victor's jaw was tight. "You were right that bringing you changed the dynamic. You were wrong that it made you safer. That man tonight would have killed you just to hurt me, Elena. I won't give anyone else that opportunity." His hand caught hers, firm and warm. "Come on, let's go home." The word home resonated strangely. The bunker wasn't home. The penthouse wasn't home. But standing here with Victor's hand in hers, surrounded by the evidence of violence and rescue tangled together, Elena realized home might not be a place at all. It might be the person who'd been protecting her since before she knew she needed protection. The man whose guilt had led to marriage, but whose care had become something deeper. The drive back was quiet. Victor kept her hand in his the entire way, his thumb moving across her knuckles in an absent pattern that felt more intimate than anything they'd shared before. When they reached the bunker, he walked her to her room but didn't leave immediately. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for tonight, for being willing to stand beside me even when it was dangerous. Thank you for letting me, for trusting me to be more than something you protect." Victor's hand came up, traced the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. "You've always been more than that. I just didn't know how to tell you." Before she could respond, before she could process what that meant, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression hardened. "What is it?" Elena asked. "We found him. Marco Giordano." Victor looked at her, something dark and determined in his eyes. "This ends tomorrow, one way or another." He left her with that promise hanging in the air, and Elena stood in the doorway long after he'd gone, feeling the weight of what was coming settle over her like a shroud. Tomorrow, the war between Victor Caldero and the Giordano family would reach its conclusion, and whatever happened next would either save them both or destroy everything they were becoming to each other. Elena didn't sleep that night. She lay in the narrow bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in the warehouse when the gun had turned toward her. The cold certainty in the gunman's eyes. The way Victor had moved without hesitation, putting himself between her and the bullet. The way his hands had trembled when he touched her face afterward, checking for injuries that weren't there. Somewhere around dawn, she gave up on sleep and found her way to the kitchen. Chen was already there, drinking coffee and cleaning a disassembled handgun with methodical precision. "Couldn't sleep either?" Elena asked. Chen glanced up. "Sleep's overrated before an operation. Coffee?" "Please." Chen poured her a cup, pushed it across the counter. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the only sound the quiet click of metal pieces being reassembled. "He's going after Marco Giordano today," Elena said finally. "Isn't he?" "Yes. And it's going to be bad." Chen's hand stilled on the weapon. "Marco's cornered. His organization's been dismantled. His people are either dead or detained. He's got nothing left to lose, which makes him extremely dangerous. Will Victor—" Elena stopped, unsure how to phrase the question. "Will he be safe?" Mr. Caldero has survived 2 decades in this world by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone else. But safe? Chen met her eyes. No one's safe when they're hunting someone with nothing to lose. The words settled in Elena's stomach like stones. She thought about Victor's exhaustion, the way he'd barely slept in a week, the guilt and determination driving him toward this final confrontation. "I need to see him," Elena said. "He's in the war room. Been there all night." Elena found him exactly where Chen had said, surrounded by maps and photographs, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked up when she entered, said something curt into the phone, and ended the call. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." Elena moved closer, taking in the evidence of his sleepless night, the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the half-empty coffee cup that had probably been refilled a dozen times. "When are you moving?" "Noon. We've tracked Marco to a property outside the city. Old factory his father used to own. He's holed up there with the last of his people." "How many?" "Unknown. Could be 5, could be 20, but Victor's jaw tightened. "Which is why you're staying here with a full security detail while I finish this." "I wasn't asking to come. I was asking so I'd know what you're walking into." Something shifted in his expression. "Why?" "Because despite everything, despite the fact that you bought me like property and dragged me into a war I didn't ask for, I don't want you to die." Elena's voice cracked slightly. "And I'm terrified that's exactly what's going to happen if you go after Marco Giordano alone." "I won't be alone. I'll have my best men—" "That's not what I mean, and you know it." She closed the distance between them, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his exhausted body. "You're not going there just to end the Giordano organization. You're going there to punish yourself. To pay some debt you think you owe my mother by putting yourself in danger." Victor's expression went carefully blank. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I've watched you, Victor. I've seen the way you carry her death, the way you look at me sometimes like you're seeing her ghost. You're not going after Marco to protect me. You're going after him to atone for failing her." "And if I am?" His voice was low, dangerous. "If that's exactly what this is, does it change anything?" "It changes whether you come back alive." Elena's hands came up to his chest, pressing against the rapid beat of his heart. Because a man looking for atonement doesn't care about surviving. He cares about making the punishment fit the crime. Victor's hands covered hers, held them against him. "What do you want me to say, Elena?" That I'll be careful. That I'll prioritize my own safety over ending the threat to you? I can't promise that. Not when Marco Giordano's existence means you'll never be safe. Then promise me you'll come back. Promise me you won't throw your life away just because you've been carrying guilt for 15 years. I can't. Yes, you can. Her voice was fierce now, urgent. You told me I was more than an investment, more than protection. Prove it. Come back to me. Come back so we can figure out what we are to each other when we're not drowning in violence and guilt. Victor stared at her, and Elena saw the moment something broke in him. His forehead dropped to hers, his breath shaky against her skin. I've wanted to hear you say that for weeks, he whispered. Wanted to believe you could see me as something other than the monster who destroyed your family. I see both, the monster and the man, and I'm choosing to believe the man is stronger. His lips brushed hers, tentative, asking permission. Elena answered by rising on her toes, closing the distance, kissing him with all the fear and hope and complicated feelings she'd been holding back. Victor made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, his hand sliding into her hair, the kiss deepening into something desperate and raw. Elena felt 15 years of distance collapse between them, felt the careful walls they'd both maintained crumbling under the weight of what they'd been denying. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victor rested his forehead against hers. I'll come back, he said quietly. I promise. I'll end this, and I'll come back to you. You better, because I'm not done being angry at you for all of this yet. He laughed, the first real laugh she'd heard from him, and the sound did something to her heart. I wouldn't expect anything less. A knock at the door interrupted them. Marco appeared, carefully not looking at how close they were standing. Sir, teams are ready to move. We're waiting on your order. Victor straightened, his expression shifting back to the cold calculation Elena recognized. But his hand found hers, squeezed once. Stay with Chen, he said to Elena. Don't leave the bunker. I'll be back before dark. Promise? Promise. He kissed her once more, quick, fierce. Then he was gone, striding out to lead his men into what might be the last battle of a war that had started before Elena was born. She stood in the war room for a long time after he left, feeling the ghost of his kiss on her lips and the terror of his promise in her heart. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Elena tried to read, to eat, to do anything that would distract her from watching the clock. Chen stayed close, silent and watchful, occasionally checking her phone for updates that never came. By 11 o'clock, Elena was pacing the bunker like a caged animal. How long does this usually take? She asked Chen. As long as it takes. Could be over in an hour. Could take all day. Chen glanced at her phone again, frowned. But we should have heard something by now, even just confirmation they've engaged. What does it mean that we haven't? Could mean nothing. Could mean communications are compromised. Could mean... Chen stopped, her expression going hard. Mrs. Caldero, I need you to go to your room and lock the door. What? Why? Because something's wrong. We should have heard from Mr. Caldero's team by now, and I just got a ping that someone's trying to access the bunker's security system. Elena's heart kicked against her ribs. You think Marco's people found us? I think we're not taking chances. Chen already had her weapon drawn, was moving toward the hallway. Your room, now. Don't open the door for anyone but me or Mr. Caldero. Elena ran. She made it to her room, slammed the door, engaged the lock. Her hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries. Then she heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, multiple sets, moving fast. Chen? She called. No answer. Elena backed away from the door, her mind racing. The window was too small to escape through. No weapons. No phone. She'd left it in the kitchen. She was trapped. The door handle rattled. Once, twice, then a voice, muffled but clear. Mrs. Caldero, we know you're in there. Make this easy and open the door. Mr. Giordano just wants to talk. Marco Giordano. Here. Which meant Victor's operation had been a trap. Meant he'd walked into an ambush. Meant he might already be dead. Where's Chen? Elena demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The bodyguard? Unconscious. Maybe dead. Hard to tell in all the excitement. The voice was casual, amused. Now open this door, or we'll open it for you. Elena looked around desperately for anything she could use as a weapon, found nothing but books and furniture. What do you want? She called. I told you. Mr. Giordano wants to talk. About your husband. About the arrangement he's willing to make to keep you both alive. Lies. Had to be lies. But what choice did she have? If I open this door, you won't hurt me? Not unless you make us. Elena's hand moved to the lock. Hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to trust them. But if Victor was already captured, if this was her only chance to see him again, the door exploded inward. Elena screamed, stumbling backward as three men in tactical gear stormed in. Hands grabbed her, yanked her arms behind her back, secured her wrists with zip ties that bit into her skin. Don't hurt her, one of them said. Boss wants her conscious and undamaged. They hauled her out of the room, down the hallway. Elena saw Chen on the floor, blood pooling beneath her head, and her stomach turned. Is she alive? Elena demanded. For now. Whether she stays that way depends on how cooperative you are. They dragged her to the elevator, up to the ground level, out into blinding afternoon sunlight. A black van waited, engine running. They shoved her inside, slammed the doors. The van moved before Elena could orient herself. She was sitting on a metal bench, hands bound, flanked by armed men who watched her with the dispassionate efficiency of professionals. Where are you taking me? She asked. To see your husband, assuming he's still breathing. The words were meant to terrify her. They worked. Elena's mind flooded with images of Victor wounded, captured, dying alone while she was being used as leverage against him. The drive took 20 minutes. When they finally stopped and the doors opened, Elena saw exactly what she'd feared. They were at the factory Victor had mentioned, sprawling, abandoned, surrounded by empty lots and industrial decay. But instead of Victor's men securing the perimeter, she saw Marco Giordano's people, at least 15 of them, heavily armed, controlling every entrance. Victor had walked into a trap, and now Elena was being delivered into it with him. They pulled her from the van, marched her through the factory entrance. Inside was a vast open space, machinery long since removed, windows broken and letting in harsh light. And in the center, kneeling with his hands bound behind his back, was Victor. He was alive, bloodied, his lips split, bruises forming on his face, but alive. When he saw Elena, something shattered in his expression. No, he said hoarsely. No, you were supposed to be safe. Touching, isn't it? A new voice, smooth and cultured. Elena turned to see a man in his 30s approaching. Expensive suit, careful grooming, eyes that held nothing but calculated cruelty. The great Victor Caldero, brought to his knees by something as simple as love. Marco Giordano. Had to be. Let her go, Victor said, his voice deadly quiet despite his position. This is between us, Marco. She has nothing to do with your father's war. Oh, but she has everything to do with it. Marco circled them both, enjoying his control. See, my father spent 15 years in exile because of you. 15 years stripped of power, of respect, of everything he'd built. And why? Because he tried to send you a message by burning down a restaurant. He killed an innocent woman, Victor said. Giulia Moretti had nothing to do with our war. Exactly. She was collateral damage. A message. The same thing your wife is about to become. Marco stopped in front of Elena, studied her face. You look like her, your mother. Same eyes, same stubborn set to your jaw. My father showed me photographs once, said Victor Caldero had a weakness for the Moretti women. I didn't believe him until I saw how quickly you married this one. Touch her and You'll what? Marco's laugh was sharp. You're on your knees, Caldero. Your men are dead or detained. Your empire is crumbling. You have no leverage here. Then what do you want? Victor's eyes found Elena's, held them. She saw apology there, and rage, and a desperate promise that somehow, he'd fix this. I want you to understand loss the way my father did. Marco pulled a gun from his jacket, pressed it to Elena's temple. I want you to watch someone you love die because of your choices. I want you to carry that guilt the way you made my father carry his failures. Elena's breath stopped. The metal was cold against her skin. Marco's finger on the trigger. Wait. The word tore from Victor's throat. Please, I'll give you anything. My territory, my holdings, my connections. Everything I have. Just let her go. Everything you have is already mine. Your organization fell apart the moment I turned your head of security. The moment I fed you false information about where I'd be today. Marco's smile was vicious. You thought you were hunting me, but I was hunting you, drawing you out, getting you to expose the one thing you actually care about. He cocked the gun. Elena closed her eyes, thought of her mother, of the fire that had started all of this, of Victor's promise to come back to her. "I'm sorry," Victor whispered. "Elena, I'm so sorry." "Stop." The new voice made everyone freeze. Elena's eyes snapped open to see a woman standing in the factory doorway, backlit by afternoon sun. Gray hair, simple clothes, a face Elena had seen in photographs. "Mama?" Marco's gun lowered slightly. "What are you doing here?" The woman walked forward, her movement slow but steady. "Stopping you from making the same mistake your father did. From destroying our family's last chance at peace." "Peace? He destroyed us? Your father destroyed us." The woman's voice was firm. Salvatore's pride, his refusal to adapt, his insistence on violence over strategy. That's what cost us everything, not Victor Caldero. She stopped in front of Marco, placed her hand over the gun still pointed at Elena. "I am Francesca Giordano," she said, looking at Victor for the first time. "Salvatore's widow, Marco's mother, and I'm here to end this war before it costs me my son the way it cost me my husband. Mother, you don't understand. I understand that you've spent 3 years rebuilding our family's power, only to throw it away on revenge. I understand that killing this woman accomplishes nothing except ensuring Victor Caldero hunts you to the ends of the earth." Francesca pushed Marco's gun down, away from Elena's head. "And I understand that your father's dying wish was for me to make sure you were smarter than he was." Marco stared at his mother, the gun hanging loose in his hand. Elena could see the war in his eyes, rage versus respect, vengeance versus survival. "He destroyed everything," Marco said, his voice breaking. "Everything Papa built." "Your Papa built an empire on blood and fear. It was always going to fall." Francesca's voice softened. "But you, my son, you could build something better, something legitimate, something that doesn't end with you dead or in prison before you're 40. She turned to Victor, still kneeling, still watching the gun in Marco's hand with murder in his eyes. "Victor Caldero," Francesca said, "my husband killed Giulia Moretti 15 years ago. That sin belongs to him, and he paid for it with exile and death. Are you willing to let the next generation pay for it too, or can we end this cycle before it destroys what's left of both our families?" Victor's eyes moved from Francesca to Marco to Elena, calculating odds and outcomes. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough but clear. "What are you proposing?" "Peace. Real peace. Marco surrenders his claim to your territory, disbands what's left of his organization, and in exchange, you let him walk away. Let him build a legitimate life somewhere far from Chicago." Francesca's gaze was steady. "No more blood, no more revenge, just an ending. And if I refuse? Then my son kills your wife, you kill my son, and this war continues until there's nothing left of either family but corpses and regret." Francesca's voice was matter-of-fact. "I've seen that ending, Mr. Caldero. I lived it when your men destroyed everything Salvatore built. I won't watch it happen again." The factory went silent. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, feel Marco's gun still in her peripheral vision, see Victor weighing the choice between vengeance and mercy. "Let her go first," Victor said finally. "Untie her, let her walk out of here. Then we'll talk about terms." Marco looked at his mother. Francesca nodded once. The zip ties on Elena's wrists were cut. She stumbled forward, and Victor was there somehow, his own bonds broken, catching her before she fell. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her, checking for injuries. "No, scared, but not hurt." Elena's voice was shaking. "Victor, Chen, they said she might be—" "Chen's alive. Marco's people called it in. She's being treated." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This was supposed to be over. You were supposed to be safe." "We can discuss your failure to protect your wife later," Francesca said dryly. "Right now, we need to settle this before someone else decides violence is the answer." Victor straightened, putting himself between Elena and the Giordanos. "Fine. Terms. Marco leaves Chicago within 48 hours, doesn't return, doesn't attempt to rebuild. Any move against me or mine, and the deal is void." "Agreed," Francesca said. "In exchange, you don't pursue him. Don't use your connections to destroy whatever legitimate business he builds. You let him have a clean start." "And the people he trafficked? The victims we pulled from his warehouses?" "Fully compensated from Giordano family funds. Everything my late husband and my son stole from them returned with interest. Francesca's voice was cold. I may defend my son, Mr. Caldero, but I don't defend his sins. Victor studied her, looking for deception, for angles, finding only a mother's desperate pragmatism. One more condition, he said quietly. Marco tells me who gave him access to my building, who helped him get to Elena. Marco's jaw tightened. He glanced at his mother, received a sharp nod. Morrison, your head of security. He approached us 6 months ago, said he was tired of being paid to protect a criminal. Wanted out, wanted money to disappear. We gave him both in exchange for information. Marco's voice was flat. He's already dead. My people found him this morning, shot in the head. Someone in your organization discovered his betrayal and handled it. Victor's expression went carefully blank. Elena knew that look now. Someone close to him had executed Morrison without waiting for orders, had taken justice into their own hands. Fine, Victor said. Marco leaves Chicago within 48 hours. Takes nothing but what he can carry, and we're done. This war, this vendetta, all of it, finished. Finished, Francesca agreed. She looked at her son. Marco? For a long moment, Marco said nothing. Then his shoulders sagged, the gun hanging loose at his side. Finished, he said quietly. Francesca nodded, satisfied. Then we'll leave you to collect your people and return to whatever passes for normal in your world, Mr. Caldero. Marco and I have a flight to arrange. She turned to go, then paused, looking back at Elena. Your mother was brave, Francesca said softly. I met her once, years ago, before the fire. She stood up to my husband when he tried to intimidate her, told him quality mattered more than profit. A sad smile crossed her face. She was right. About many things. I hope you inherited her strength. Then she was gone, Marco following, their people melting away like shadows. Elena and Victor stood alone in the vast empty factory, surrounded by the debris of a war that had finally, impossibly, ended without more death. Is it really over? Elena whispered. I don't know. Victor pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. But I'm done fighting, done carrying guilt for things I can't change, done letting the past dictate the future. What does that mean? He pulled back, looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. It means I'm choosing you. Not because you're an investment or a debt to pay, but because somewhere in all this violence and fear, you became the person I want to come home to. The person I want to build something real with. Victor, I love you. The words came out rough, unpracticed, like he'd never said them before and wasn't sure how they'd land. I've been falling in love with you since you stood in my study and demanded to know the truth instead of accepting easy lies. Since you insisted on helping rescue those women instead of staying safe. Since you looked at me like I was more than the monster who destroyed your mother's life. Tears burned in Elena's eyes. I'm still angry at you for all of this. For the marriage, the secrets, the danger. I know. And I don't forgive you. Not entirely. Not yet. I know. But I love you anyway. The admission felt like jumping off a cliff. I love you, and I'm terrified of what that means, and I have no idea how we build a life from this mess. Victor's smile was small, fragile, real. Then we figure it out together, starting now. He kissed her in the ruins of the factory where a war had ended, where 15 years of violence and guilt had finally collapsed into something that looked almost like peace. And Elena kissed him back, tasting blood and hope and the impossible future they might actually have together. When they finally pulled apart, she heard sirens in the distance, Victor's people arriving, or the authorities, or both. We should go, Victor said. Where? Home. The real one. Not the bunker, not the penthouse. Somewhere we choose together. Elena took his hand, felt his fingers interlock with hers. A promise and a beginning all at once. Okay, she said. Let's go home. They walked out of the factory together into the afternoon light, leaving behind the ghosts and the guilt and the violence that had brought them together. Ahead lay questions and complications and the hard work of building trust from broken foundations. But for the first time since the day Elena had worn white and married a stranger, she believed they might actually make it, not because the danger was gone or the past erased, but because they'd chosen each other anyway, in spite of everything, and that choice was stronger than any war. The first 3 weeks after the factory felt like learning to breathe in a new atmosphere. Victor moved them out of the penthouse to a house in Evanston, smaller, warmer, with actual sunlight and neighbors who walked dogs past their windows. Chen recovered from her injuries and returned to work with a scar above her left eye and a promotion to head of security. Marco Giordano disappeared to somewhere in Europe, his mother's promise apparently enough to keep him there. And Elena woke up every morning beside Victor, still half surprised to find him real and alive and hers. But peace, she learned, was harder than war in its own way. War had clear enemies and defined goals. Peace required them to actually build something from the wreckage. "Tell me about Portland," Victor said one morning over coffee. They were in the kitchen of their new house, early light streaming through windows Elena had chosen specifically for this reason. "Why?" "Because it's the life you built before I pulled you back into this one. And if we're starting over, I should know what you gave up." Elena wrapped her hands around her mug, considering. "It was quiet. Small apartment above a bookshop where I worked. I knew my neighbors' names, had a routine, nothing extraordinary, but it was mine." "Do you miss it?" "Sometimes. Mostly I miss the simplicity, the not looking over my shoulder wondering if someone's planning to kill me." She met his eyes. "But if I'm being honest, it was also lonely. Safe, but lonely. Like I was hiding from life instead of living it." Victor's hand covered hers on the table. "I'm sorry I took that choice from you. The choice to come back on your terms. You are now. But you weren't then." "No," he admitted. "Then I was trying to save you without asking if you wanted to be saved, without considering that protection can be another kind of cage." It was this honesty, raw and uncomfortable, that was slowly rebuilding trust between them. Victor was learning to share not just information, but vulnerability, and Elena was learning to believe that the man who'd married her out of guilt could love her despite it. But some truths were still locked away, waiting for the right moment to surface. That moment came on a Tuesday afternoon when Elena was organizing the study in their new house. She found a box she didn't recognize, unmarked, pushed to the back of a closet Victor had claimed for storage. Inside were files, old ones, yellowed with age, and on top, a folder labeled Julia Moretti, personal. Elena's hopti shook as she opened it. Photographs spilled out. Her mother, younger than Elena had ever seen her, laughing at someone off camera. Working in her restaurant's kitchen, flour on her apron. Standing beside a man Elena didn't recognize, her hand resting on his arm with easy affection. And beneath the photographs, letters. Dozens of them, written in her mother's handwriting, addressed to someone named V. Elena's breath stopped. She picked up the first letter, dated 23 years ago, and began to read. V. I know you said we shouldn't write to each other, that it's safer to keep distance, but I can't pretend yesterday didn't happen. Can't pretend I don't feel something I shouldn't. You were right that our worlds don't fit, but my heart doesn't seem to care about logic. The words blurred. Elena grabbed another letter, then another, piecing together a story she'd never known existed. Her mother and Victor. Not just acquaintances, not just restaurant owner and crime lord negotiating protection. They'd been in love. The letters spanned 2 years. Her mother pouring out feelings she couldn't express publicly, Victor responding with his own careful confessions. Talk of stolen afternoons, of imagining futures that could never exist, of a choice that eventually had to be made. The last letter was dated 6 months before the fire that killed her mother. Elena read it with tears streaming down her face. V. I know you're angry. I know you think I'm making a mistake, but I have to try to make this work with Antonio for Elena's sake. She deserves a father who's present, even if he's not the man I love. You and I, we were never going to work. Your world would have consumed us both. This way, at least, I can give her stability, safety, a normal life. Please understand. Please don't hate me for choosing my daughter over what we had. Gielena sat on the floor surrounded by evidence of a love story her mother had hidden, of a connection between Victor and Julia Moretti that explained everything and changed everything. Victor had loved her mother, had been in love with her when she died, had married Elena not just out of guilt for failing to protect Julia, but because some part of him saw Elena as a second chance to save the woman he'd lost. The realization hit like a physical blow. She was still sitting there, surrounded by letters, when Victor came home. He stopped in the doorway to the study, saw the box, saw the photographs and letters spread across the floor, and something shattered in his expression. Elena, you loved her. Her voice was hollow. My mother. You were in love with her. Victor's hands curled into fists at his sides. Yes. For how long? 2 years. Maybe longer. I don't know when it started, just that one day I looked at her and understood I'd give up everything I'd built if she asked me to. Did she know? She knew. We tried to pretend it was just friendship, just mutual respect, but we both knew it was more. He moved into the room slowly, like approaching something wounded. She chose your father, chose trying to give you a stable family, and I let her go because that's what she wanted. Elena looked down at the letters in her lap. And then she died, and you've been trying to save her ever since. Through me. That's not... Victor stopped, started again. At first, maybe. At first, protecting you was about her, about the promise I made to myself standing over her grave. But Elena, you have to understand... Understand what? That you married me because I reminded you of the woman you actually loved? That every time you look at me, you see her ghost? Elena's voice cracked. Do you even see me, Victor? Or am I just a replacement for what you lost? No. He crossed the room, dropped to his knees in front of her. No, Elena, listen to me. When I first saw you again, when your father brought you to my study, and I realized the 12-year-old I'd been protecting from a distance had become this strong, stubborn woman, I saw Julia's eyes and her courage. But I also saw you, Elena, someone completely separate from her mother. How can I believe that when you've been hiding this for months? When you married me without telling me you'd been in love with my mother? Because I was ashamed. The admission came out raw. Because I didn't know how to tell you that I'd failed the woman I loved and was trying to protect her daughter out of guilt and something more complicated I didn't understand yet. Elena looked at him through her tears. Tell me the truth. Right now, do you love me? Or do you love who I remind you of? Victor's hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing away tears. I love you, Elena Moretti Caldero. You, specifically. Your stubbornness when you demanded to know the truth instead of accepting comfortable lies. Your courage in that warehouse when you could have hidden but chose to stand beside me. The way you see people, really see them, including the monster everyone else is afraid to look at directly. His voice broke. Your mother was kind and brave and chose safety over passion. You're fierce and reckless and choose truth even when it destroys you. You're not her. You've never been her. And I love you for exactly who you are. Then why keep the letters? Why hold on to her after all these years? Because she was part of my history, part of how I became the man sitting in front of you. I don't love her anymore, Elena. I haven't for a long time. But I owed her the respect of not erasing what we had just because it ended. He lowered his hands, his expression open and desperate. The same way I hope someday, if this ends badly, you won't erase what we built just because it hurt. Elena looked down at the letters scattered across the floor, at the evidence of a love story that had ended 15 years ago, and felt something shift in her understanding. Victor wasn't holding on to Julia. He was holding on to the memory of being someone who could love openly before his world forced him to bury everything soft beneath layers of control and violence. I need you to promise me something, she said quietly. Anything. Promise me you'll never lie to me again. Not by omission, not by careful wording, not by any method. Because if we're going to make this work, if we're going to build something real from all this wreckage, I need to trust that you see me, not her, not some amalgamation of guilt and memory, me. I promise. Victor's hands found hers, intertwined their fingers. No more secrets, no more protecting you from truths I think will hurt. Just honesty, even when it's difficult. Okay? Elena took a shaky breath. Then I need to tell you something too. What? I'm terrified. Of this, of us, of building a life with someone whose past is soaked in violence. I wake up some mornings and wonder if I'm making the same mistake my mother made, choosing safety with the wrong man instead of finding something real somewhere else. Victor flinched but didn't pull away. And then I remember you took a bullet shielding me from an assassination attempt. Remember you dismantled an entire criminal organization to keep me safe. Remember the way you look at me like I'm something precious and breakable and strong all at once. She squeezed his hands. I'm terrified, but I'm staying anyway, because what we're building is worth the fear. He pulled her close then, buried his face in her hair, and she felt him shaking. Thank you, he whispered, for staying, for seeing past the monster to whatever's underneath. They sat like that for a long time, surrounded by letters from the past, building something new from the honesty between them. Later that night, after they'd packed away the letters and photographs, after Victor had shown Elena where he kept other pieces of his history she'd never seen, they lay in bed talking about the future instead of the past. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "With your organization, your territory, all of it?" "I'm stepping back," Victor said. "Not out completely. That would create a power vacuum someone worse would fill. But I'm transitioning to legitimate businesses. Real estate development, security consulting, investment portfolios. Things that don't require violence to maintain. Can you do that? Just walk away from what you built?" "I'm 42, Elena. I've spent 20 years building an empire on fear and control. I'm tired. And more than that, I want to build something with you that isn't stained with blood." He turned to face her in the darkness. "But that means risk. It means some of my people will see it as weakness, see you as the reason their boss went soft. Are you asking if I can handle that? I'm asking if you want to. Because the alternative is, I stay exactly who I've been, and you spend the rest of our lives waiting for the violence to catch up with us." Elena thought about the warehouse, the factory, the constant fear that had colored their first months together. Then she thought about the women they'd rescued, about Chen's loyalty, about the possibility of building something that helped instead of hurt. "I want to help," she said finally. "With the transition, with building something legitimate, you have resources and connections. Let's use them for something good." "Like what?" "A foundation. For trafficking victims, like the women we pulled from Marco's warehouses. Somewhere they can get real help, housing, legal assistance, job training, counseling. Everything they need to actually rebuild their lives." Her voice gained strength as the idea solidified. "We use your money, your power, your influence, all the things you built through violence, and transform them into something that protects people instead of exploiting them." Victor was quiet for so long Elena worried she'd overstepped. Then his hand found hers in the darkness. "Your mother would have loved that idea," he said softly. "She always believed in second chances, in using whatever resources you had to help people who needed it most. Then let's do it for her, and for every person who got caught in wars they never asked to be part of." "Okay," Victor said. "We'll build it together." The Julia Moretti Foundation launched 6 months later. Elena stood on a small stage in a community center on Chicago's South Side, looking out at faces that ranged from curious to skeptical to hopeful. Women who'd been rescued from trafficking operations, social workers, legal advocates, community leaders who'd spent years fighting the same systems Victor had once profited from. "My mother died in a fire 15 years ago," Elena began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "She was caught in a war between powerful men who saw people as collateral damage. For a long time I thought the best way to honor her memory was to stay away from that world, to build a quiet, safe life where violence couldn't touch me." She paused, found Victor in the crowd. He stood at the back, deliberately inconspicuous, but his eyes were on her with an intensity that still made her breath catch. "But I learned that safety isn't the same as meaning, and that sometimes the best way to honor someone's memory isn't to hide from the world that took them, but to transform it." Elena gestured to the space around them, the community center that had once been a front for one of Victor's operations, now converted into a resource hub for survivors. "This foundation exists because my mother believed people deserved second chances. Because she saw potential in everyone, even people the world had written off." She outlined the foundation's programs: safe housing, legal assistance, job training, counseling, educational scholarships, all funded by money from Victor's legitimate businesses and carefully liquidated criminal assets. When she finished, a woman in the front row raised her hand. Elena recognized her, Sophia, one of the women rescued from Marco Giordano's warehouse. "Mrs. Caldero," Sophia said carefully, "everyone here knows who your husband is, what he was. How can we trust that this foundation isn't just another way for him to control people?" The question was fair. Elena had expected it. "You can't," she said honestly. "Not yet. Trust is earned, not given. All I can tell you is that this foundation is mine to run. My decisions, my vision, my accountability. Victor provides resources, but he doesn't control how they're used, and if at any point this becomes something that exploits instead of helps, I'll burn it down myself." She saw approval flash across Sophia's face. The woman nodded, sat back. After the presentation, Elena spent hours talking with survivors, hearing their stories, understanding what they needed. Victor stayed in the background, watching, occasionally fielding quiet questions from people who recognized him and wanted to know if his wife's promises were real. When they finally left, exhausted but hopeful, Elena leaned against him in the car. "How did I do?" she asked. "You were perfect. Honest, clear, exactly what they needed to hear." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Your mother would be proud." "I hope so." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the day settle over her. "This is going to be hard, isn't it? Building something good from something that caused so much harm?" "Yes. Some people will never trust it, never trust us, and they'll have good reasons." Victor's arm tightened around her. "But we're going to try anyway. And maybe eventually we'll build enough good to balance some of the bad." 3 years passed. The foundation grew, expanding to 3 locations across Chicago and partnering with similar organizations in other cities. Elena threw herself into the work with fierce dedication, using everything she'd learned about Victor's world to dismantle the systems that enabled trafficking and exploitation. Chen became the foundation's head of security, training survivors in self-defense and hiring several as protective details for high-risk cases. Rosa managed operations with the same quiet efficiency she'd brought to Victor's household. And Marco, Victor's trusted advisor, took early retirement, his pension funding a scholarship program for children of incarcerated parents. Victor made good on his promise to transition out of criminal enterprises. The process was slow, dangerous, and required careful negotiation with people who didn't appreciate their revenue streams being legitimized or eliminated. But gradually, systematically, he transformed his empire from something built on fear into something resembling a normal business conglomerate. Elena watched him change in the process. The hard edges didn't disappear. Victor would never be soft, but they became tools he chose to use rather than armor he couldn't remove. He smiled more, laughed at her terrible jokes, learned to cook badly and insist on trying anyway. They were building a life together. Messy, complicated, still shadowed by the past, but theirs. Then one morning, Elena woke up nauseous and exhausted and knew their life was about to change again. She took the test alone, sitting on the bathroom floor of their house in Evanston, hands shaking as the result appeared. Pregnant. She was pregnant with Victor Caldero's child. The realization brought a rush of emotions she couldn't untangle, joy and terror and wonder and fear all twisted together. A child. Their child. A person who would carry both her mother's legacy and Victor's complicated history. She told him that night over dinner. Just set the test on the table between them and waited. Victor stared at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at her, and she saw tears in his eyes for the first time since the factory. "Are you sure?" His voice was hoarse. "As sure as a pregnancy test can make me." "And you want—" He stopped, started again. "What do you want to do?" "I want to keep it. If you do." Victor stood abruptly, crossed to her side of the table, pulled her up and into his arms. "Yes," he said against her hair. "Yes, absolutely yes. If you're sure. If this is what you want." "I'm terrified," Elena admitted. "But yes. I want this. Want us. Want to see what kind of parents we can be." "We'll be terrible at it," Victor said, laughing even as tears streaked his face. "We're both disasters. You're stubborn and reckless, and I'm a recovering crime lord with anger management issues. So we'll be interesting parents. Our kid will have stories. Our kid is going to need so much therapy." "Probably." Elena pulled back, met his eyes. "But they'll be loved, fiercely, completely loved. That has to count for something." Victor kissed her then, deep and grateful and full of promises about the future they were building together. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. Elena's stomach tightened. "What?" "That box of letters you found 3 years ago, the ones from your mother." He pulled back slightly, met her eyes. "There was one more. One I didn't show you because I was afraid it would hurt too much." "What did it say?" Victor crossed to his study, returned with a single envelope, yellowed with age. He handed it to Elena with careful reverence. "She wrote it the day before she died. I found it in her restaurant's office after the fire. The envelope was addressed to me, but inside—" He gestured for her to open it. Elena's hands shook as she pulled out the letter. Her mother's handwriting, familiar and achingly precious. "Victor, if you're reading this, something went wrong. I'm probably gone. And you're probably blaming yourself. Don't. We both knew the risks of living in your world even at arm's length. But I need you to promise me something. If anything happens to me, watch over Elena. Not just from a distance. Really watch over her. Make sure she's safe, loved, given chances to be more than I could be. She's stubborn like you, and brave like I tried to be. She's going to need someone who understands both. Promise me you'll be there when she needs you. Even if she doesn't know she needs you, even if it costs you everything, she's the best thing I ever did. Keep her safe. G. Elena read it twice, tears streaming down her face. Her mother had known, had understood even then that Victor would protect her daughter, had trusted him with Elena's future even while choosing another man for her present. She knew, Elena whispered. She knew you'd keep me safe. I've been trying to keep that promise for 15 years, Victor said quietly, sometimes successfully, sometimes disastrously. But I've never stopped trying. Elena looked at him. This man who'd carried her mother's final request like a sacred duty, who'd married her out of guilt and learned to love her despite it, who was now standing in their kitchen looking terrified and hopeful about becoming a father. You kept your promise, she said. You kept me safe, even when safe meant forcing me into a marriage I didn't want, even when it meant exposing me to danger to end it. You kept your promise to my mother, and somewhere along the way, you kept every promise to me, too. Victor pulled her close again, and they stood like that in the kitchen, holding each other, holding the future, holding the impossible gift of second chances. Their daughter was born on a clear October morning 6 months later. Elena held her in the hospital room, tiny, perfect, with dark hair and her father's serious eyes, and felt the entire world reorganize itself around this new person. What should we name her? Victor asked, sitting beside the bed, his finger caught in their daughter's impossibly small grip. Elena looked at the baby, thought about legacy and history, and the woman who died so this child could eventually exist. Julia, she said softly. Julia Sophia. For my mother and for the woman who asked the hard questions at the foundation's opening, the women who showed us what courage looks like. Victor's eyes met hers, understanding passing between them. Julia Sofia Caldero, he said, testing the name. She's going to be formidable. She's going to be loved, Elena corrected. Everything else is negotiable. They brought their daughter home to the house in Evanston, to the life they'd built from wreckage and violence and stubborn refusal to give up on each other. Chen installed additional security. Rosa baby-proofed everything. The foundation staff sent enough gifts to fill 3 rooms. And Victor, fearsome Victor Caldero, who'd ruled Chicago's underworld through calculated intimidation, became the kind of father who sang terrible lullabies and read board books with dramatic flair and panicked over every sneeze. Elena watched him one night, standing over Julia's crib, his hand gentle on their daughter's back, and understood that redemption wasn't a single moment. It was this: choosing every day to be better than you were, to build something good from the ruins of what you'd been. 5 years passed. Julia grew into a whirlwind of energy and questions, demanding to know how everything worked and why the sky was blue, and whether her father had really once been the scariest man in Chicago, like she'd heard whispered at school. Victor fielded these questions with remarkable patience, explaining that yes, he'd made bad choices, and yes, people had been afraid of him, but that was before he'd understood there were better ways to be strong. The foundation expanded to 7 cities, helping thousands of survivors rebuild their lives. Elena ran it with Chen's security expertise and a board of directors that included several survivors who'd come through their programs. Sophia, the woman who had asked the hard question at their first presentation, now served as the foundation's director of outreach. And Victor's business empire, fully legitimate now, quietly funded programs across the city, youth centers, job training initiatives, community development projects. He'd taken the wealth built on exploitation and transformed it into something that actually helped people. It wasn't perfect. Some days were harder than others. Some nights Victor woke gasping from nightmares about the past. Some afternoons, Elena looked at her daughter and felt the weight of everything Julia would never know about her grandmother. But they were building something real, something that honored the people they'd lost, and the people they'd saved, and the improbable love they'd found in the wreckage. On a summer evening when Julia was 6, Elena found Victor in the study, looking at the old photograph of her mother's restaurant, the only thing he'd kept from that box of letters. "You okay?" she asked, settling beside him. "Just remembering," he said quietly, "thinking about how different things could have been." How many small moments had to align exactly right to get us here? Regrets? About the past? Dozens? About us? He pulled her close. Not a single one. Elena leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the steady beat of his heart. She'd be happy, I think. My mother. Not about how it happened, but about where it led. You think so? I know so. She told you to keep me safe, and you did. But more than that, you helped me become someone who could keep other people safe. That's the best kind of legacy. They sat like that until Julia appeared in the doorway, demanding someone read her a story about princesses who fought dragons and saved themselves. Victor scooped her up, tickled her until she squealed, then carried her off to bed with promises of the most dramatic storytelling she'd ever heard. Elena watched them go, her impossible family, built from guilt and violence and the stubborn insistence that people could change, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Real peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of something worth protecting. She thought of her mother, dead 15 years now, whose final request had set all of this in motion. Thought of Francesca Giordano, choosing her son's future over her husband's vengeance. Thought of all the women who'd passed through the foundation, choosing to rebuild instead of break. The past couldn't be changed, the violence couldn't be erased, but it could be transformed into something that meant something. That night, after Julia was asleep and the house was quiet, Elena and Victor sat on their back porch, watching fireflies dance across the lawn. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met differently? Elena asked. If there'd been no war, no debt, no forced marriage? Victor considered the question, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Sometimes. But then I remember that the things that broke us were also the things that forged us. We became who we are because of the fire, not despite it. That's very poetic for a former crime lord. I contain multitudes. He squeezed her hand. Besides, I've had a good teacher in finding meaning from chaos. Elena leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the weight of their shared history and the lightness of their shared future balanced perfectly. I love you, she said quietly. Not because you saved me, not because of guilt or obligation or any complicated reason, just because you're you, and I choose you every single day. I love you too, Victor said, for exactly the same reasons. They sat like that until the fireflies disappeared and the stars came out, building their future one quiet moment at a time, proving that even the darkest pasts could lead to the brightest futures if you were willing to fight for them. And in the house behind them, a little girl slept soundly, dreaming of dragons and princesses and the kind of love that survives fire and comes out stronger on the other side. The war was over. The debts were paid. And in their place was something neither Victor nor Elena had expected when they'd stood in that cathedral and spoken vows they didn't mean. They'd found home. Not in a place, but in each other. Not because it was easy, but because it was worth it. And that, Elena thought, as she drifted off to sleep in Victor's arms, was the best kind of ending. The kind that was really a beginning, stretched out into forever, built on truth and trust and the stubborn refusal to let the past define the future. Her mother had died in fire 15 years ago. But from those ashes, Elena had built something that would outlast them all. Love that chose meaning over safety, redemption over revenge, and hope over the easy comfort of giving up. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything.